You're tuned in to Evolve, a series dedicated to the evolution of technology, society, and business. With Aarron Spinley. Let's get into the show.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm pretty stoked to be doing this particular episode because for me this is a subject that it's one of those distinctive areas of experience economics and go-to-market strategy that we see today that hasn't really been around, certainly not in this type of flavor ever before really. Influencer marketing, about a decade ago, was really the domain of, pop stars and celebrities and maybe the odd blogger. But what we've seen now is the adoption of that in B2C brands in particular. And there's a lot of forecasting around the application of influencer marketing in B2B brands. Now, what's interesting is that if you go and look at this stuff, there's still a lot of debate around what works and what doesn't work. And so today, it's pretty cool to be joined by someone who's more qualified than most to really unpack this whole area for us. She was a marketer at Adobe. She was a marketer at Apple. And keeping it real with the big tech trends, she's now the global head of influencer marketing at SAP. Ursula Ringham is also one of the most enthusiastic people that I have ever met. This will be fun. Well, Ursula, welcome to the show, and thank you for coming and hanging out.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Aarron.
No, it's my pleasure. And I've wanted to do this for a little while, actually. We spoke last year and you talked a little bit about your sort of backstory, sort of how you got here and your journey through the likes of Adobe and Apple, and then you were an author, and it was a really interesting story to me. And I'd love to start there, actually. I'd just like to start with, we'll get to the influencer stuff, but can we start
Start at ground zero.
Let's start at ground zero with who is Ursula Ringham? I'd love to hear that story again.
Sure, no worries. So California girl, actually native Californian, which in the high-tech space people think is an anomaly, right? But born and raised in Palo Alto, heart of Silicon Valley, lots of stories on how, the Valley has changed over the years. But, I got my start by accident. I was a sophomore in college. I just finished, and I used to work at Stanford University in their food service. And this was just, something you'd call up 2 weeks before you started your summer break. And you'd say, hey, do you have a job for me? And I had become a manager of some of the food service employees in the summer. And I called them up and they said, oh, we'd love to have you, but your job's been eliminated. And of course you're like, what? And they're like, you can come back, but you're going to be one of the food servers. And I'm like, I got to be a manager. Why would I want to go back? And so I started looking for jobs, and happenstance, one of my sister's friends randomly called my parents and was talking to them and said, by the way, what's Ursula doing? Oh, she's looking for a job. Oh, well, have her come down. My company, we're looking at hiring. And so I went down, interviewed, had no idea what software or hardware was, and ended up getting hired by Adobe Systems as an inside sales rep. And that's how I got my start. And let me tell you, I was seduced from day one. I was an international relations major, and I thought I would go on to maybe be a diplomat. I had these kind of worldly views on what I could do. But then I started working in the software industry and high tech, and I really enjoyed it. Just learning about the technology. Adobe was a very interesting place to work with in the 90s. And just the people all around, it really seduced me. And so after graduation, I ended up, after, little startups here or there, coming back and working at Adobe. I worked in their developer relations organization. I ended up managing our developer relations. We had a developer relations group. So we would work with these developers that were creating plugins to work with Adobe products to enhance them. And I ended up doing odd things like becoming the editor of our technical journal. And Adobe really allowed me to kind of explore different areas and learn about technology, learn about the software side. I got a random call from a friend of mine from high school, and she was soliciting donations for our alumni fund. And we started talking, and she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm consulting. And she's like, well, I'm at Apple right now. And this was in beginning of 98. Steve Jobs
Wow.
had just come back in 97. And she's like, you know what? We're looking for some real good people. And Aarron, at the time, mind you, Apple, no one wanted to work there then. No one did. They're like, it's a disaster. They brought Steve Jobs back. What is he even doing back there? They were just about to launch a new operating system based on Unix. Who does this? And so it's ironic to like hear that, but no one wanted to work there. So I'm like, maybe I'll throw my hat in the ring. And I decided, let me just at least interview. So I ended up accepting a job managing their developer website.
Right.
So I did that for a while, and then I got to know Apple, and they got to know me, and they said, you're a people person. You need to be out in front of people. And so I actually ended up accepting a job working for that friend from high school. So very ironic, being a partnership manager / like evangelist. And our role was to convince people to develop for Mac OS X. And it's really interesting because today, Apple has their Worldwide Developer Conference. I'm sure your audience knows about this. It's a very sought after conference to attend. It gets sold out. Back when I was at Apple, it didn't get sold out. We had to like convince people, sometimes even pay them to just like, can you please come to the conference? And so it was interesting. We were this really rat pack group of, change makers. We were trying to make a change. And it was, Steve Jobs, it was very interesting working for him at that time because we were, he's like, be happy you have a job. This is a very tough industry and we're trying to make a comeback. And so there's a group of us that were part of this momentum that were working there. And, still to this day, I have some friends that are still there because they believe so much in what Apple's doing. And so anyhow, long story short, I ended up there. And then I took time off to have children. I left right before the iPhone came out. Yay, Ursula. I should have stayed. But you know what? Having kids and being able to stay at home is priceless. You can't buy that. That is something that's amazing. And I stayed at home. At the time, I did some writing, which we'll talk about later. And then about 8 years into it, I decided I want to get back into high tech. Guess what? No one wanted to hire me. They say, yeah, you're back in the day, you're great, but you can't keep up. There's people that have been out here working this whole time. And mind you, I've been doing writing. It's not like I totally evaporated just because I was a mom. And actually, I think like moms that come back to work are the hardest workers because they understand what it takes to get back into the industry. And so how I got back in and ended up at SAP was I was talking to a girlfriend in the neighborhood and telling her of my challenges. And mind you, at the time, I was taking any kind of jobs I could get. Like I was doing a consulting gig with a recruiting company. I was helping out with doing some campaigns, some very minor marketing campaigns, but nothing full time. And I was talking to this girlfriend. I told her, gosh, I'd love to get back in high tech. And she's like, well, I need someone to write customer success stories. Do you think you could do it? I raised my hand. Absolutely. Had I ever done it? No. But I'm like, I could do it. So she believed in me and unvetted brought me into SAP. They basically said, here's a bunch of stories we want you to write. I had to contact the customer, find out what the story was. I had a template I had to work with, right? So it's not just Ursula, go off and just create whatever. It's like, here's the structure they want you to write. You have an editor you work with, and let's do something. Okay. And I was very successful. I had like 10 stories that I wrote, and they loved it because I brought kind of a different perspective. My writing style being on the fiction side and kind of making it exciting. Like there's a family in the Alps, and the lights have gone out and they're huddled around their fireplaces. A storm is raging outside. But guess what? Their power company uses SAP and they can turn the lights on faster when it goes out. My VP took me aside and said, you're working part-time, you're doing these stories, but I saw your LinkedIn. I bet you can do more. And I said, raise my hand again. Of course I can. And she said, we've got these interns that are managing our small and mid-sized enterprise social channels. Do you think you could do a better job? Raise my hand. Of course I can. So basically they brought me in. I created this whole structured program around creating as a whole content strategy, how to increase our amplification that SAP has these small, mid-sized enterprise products. And we did it through thought leadership. We did it through having our executives as kind of evangelists, like thought leaders with blogs, and then also having influencers. And I set up this program, and about a year into it, they said, we can't have you as a contractor anymore. We need to bring you in full time. And that's how I ended up at SAP.
That is one journey, right? That's that's one
Quite a
big
journey.
journey.
Quite a journey.
And look, the reason I'm interested in it is that when we get these sort of new areas, if I can call them that, or these kinds of new jobs which emerge as the economy changes, as technology emerges and such like, it's kind of hard to go find someone that's done it before because it didn't exist before. And so,
Yeah, I didn't know social media like
right,
9 years ago. I'm like, social media, I guess, yeah, I kind of post some stuff there. Had no idea for business. Would I even use it?
yeah, and look, it's a nice segue to something I want to talk about, which is this whole notion of creativity, right? And it used to be, in fact, it probably still is in most organizations, that the creative department's down the hallway in room 22, and we let them out for lunch on Wednesdays. But, generally it's kind of this isolated thing. And, I believe now that creativity is actually mission critical in its core, but we still haven't seen a lot of that shift yet. So I'm interested in your thoughts around that. And I know that you've, as an author, and in your story, you talk a lot about, backgrounds that essentially have a creative base. How important is that? I mean, clearly across business, it's becoming more and more important, but in an influencer context, what role does that play?
Creativity is paramount. It is so important. But let me tell you, storytelling is even more important. So if you can combine the two, that is the key thing. And so it's interesting, Aarron, like right now I'm hiring an intern. And it's very interesting to find out what, the college students are doing these days. And I'm jealous. I want to go back in time. I want to go and do what they're doing today. One of the interns I interviewed, it's like she has getting a degree in digital marketing and filmmaking. Huge. Because when you think of filmmaking, it's all around the storytelling.
Right.
And that's why I'm a huge movie buff. I mean, for me, the two movies that had the biggest impact when I was little, and I might be dating myself here, but Star Wars: The New Hope, the first original, Star Wars: The New Hope, and Indiana Jones. We had never seen anything like that. And that was kind of my start of the creativity of thinking things through. And at the time, my dad had gotten one of these video cameras, but it was a video camera that had the big, like, lunch box that came with it, right? You had to carry for your video. But I would do funny little skits. I would make up things. At a young age, I would start just writing funny stories because I enjoyed that just for a passion. And with creativity today, you have to think out of the box. You have to just throw something on the wall and see if it sticks. And creativity is everything,
Right.
because I tell you, there's a lot of noise out there, and
Yeah.
it's whoever can be the most creative to cut through that noise to get that audience to pay attention to what you're doing.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And I think that the brands that are memorable, and it's an interesting thing, I spend a lot of time in the CRM and the CX kind of space. There's a lot of talk about being as frictionless as possible. And it's a little bit dangerous when you talk about, an experience economy perspective, because experience is about building memory, right? Memories that shape perception and create emotion. And you don't want to be too frictionless when you're creating memory. So there's this interesting juxtaposition that we see from a strategy perspective, and creativity is such an unpacker or an enabler of those kinds of successful strategies. When you talk about influencer marketing, or you just use the term, there's like this connotation, right? It's like it's a 16-year-old, bikini-clad millennial by a pool selling cereal, right? And I'm pretty sure you didn't take that approach at Adobe or Apple, and pretty sure you're not taking that approach at SAP. How would you define influencer marketing today?
Very good question. And we're in the midst of change right now. And I have to emphasize there's a difference between like the B2B influencer marketing and B2C. So
Right.
what you just described is like the bikini clad Instagram model. That's definitely the B2C side. And I think what's happening in B2C is people are starting to realize this is kind of fake, right? Because what happens is, you have these people, they're good looking, they're out there, but are they really being authentic when they decide to promote a product? And that's where the difference is in the B2B marketing, You really have to look at the thought leaders, the practitioners, the experts that have been in the space around technology. And I'm not saying they have to know SAP products, right? They don't have to be an expert in it. Sometimes they are, which I'm like, oh my God, you are? Wow, you know S/4HANA? Oh gosh, okay. But my point is that if, like, let's say they've been a practitioner for 20 years in the HR space, right? They understand, human management, not human management, human capital management, right? They maybe now have gone off on their own and they consult with businesses on what are the best products to use, but maybe they have a podcast on the future of work. Maybe they write a blog series on just different employment, like employment experiences, what's happening. And these people are then trusted voices that people follow to stay up to date on what's happening in the space. That's very different than a bikini model wearing, bikini. You're not going to wear an HR software, right? Because in the B2B space with like SAP, you can't touch our product. You can't really eat it. You can't look at it. You can't taste it, smell it. So what do? You have to find these trusted voices that people are naturally following because they're in the tech space. They understand the technology, like IoT, machine learning. They maybe have used it themselves. Maybe they're a professor. Maybe they've developed apps around this. These are the type of people that we're working with, which is very different. And so I like to say they're trusted voices influencing buyer decisions. But what we do is we collaborate with them on thought leadership topics. So it's very different. A B2C influencer is not going to necessarily do that. They're going to be more like, hey, give me, access to this product or give me a free product and I'll promote it. But is that really authentic? I think like if you, for example, there's like in sports, if there is a young, like professional athlete or someone, let's just say like a skier, and they have been skiing for years on this one brand of skis. And I'm going to give a shout out because my whole family is skiers and my kids compete in junior free mountain, big mountain skiing. But like my daughter loves Moment Skis. It's a small locally owned place in Reno. And if they came to her because they're like, wow, she's been winning competitions and they were hypothetically to give her a pair of skis, she would be like, oh my gosh, I love Moment. And authentically, she would be promoting that to her audience because she's been using that ski for years. That's more authentic, right? Than just, hey, we wanted you to use this ski that you've never used before. Well, what, I don't know anything about it, right? So that's kind of the difference is the B2C side versus B2B. And the B2B, we have to really find the people that are authentic and really know the topics around technology.
Yeah, absolutely. That answer probably touched on about 10 different themes and subjects. I could spend the day here unpacking that stuff for you, or with you, I should say. The trust element is something that is really interesting to me. I know if you look at the Edelman work, the Edelman Trust Barometer, that they started doing their work around 2000 or so, and trying to understand, what it was and who it was that people trust. And back then it was, established names like an established leader or an analyst or a celebrity or something like that. And around 2004, this whole new category emerged, and I can't remember the exact wording of the category, but essentially it was something like people who are like me, right? So the sense as institutional trust has been collapsing around us, and we're suddenly not so excited about taking our news from the brand that's trying to sell us something, but rather we'll listen to someone who we trust talk about that brand. That's definitely been a trend which has got more and more traction. And clearly as the tech has changed around us, that's changed in strategies, etc. But what do you think? You've already mentioned authenticity, and I want to unwrap that a little bit more with you as well. But to start with, what do you think, the sort of the most successful strategies are that we see today that resonates with people?
Yeah, well, you touched on such a good point there about like these recommendations from friends, so to speak. So for example, if you want to go see the latest movie, where you go? Some people go and they'll look at like, in the United States, Rotten Tomatoes, but then a lot of people it's word of mouth, right? Like, I have friends on Facebook and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I just read the best book. And that's true, authentic. They're not like friends of the writer. They just read this and like, this is fantastic, right? And so that's where like the whole thing around the trusted voices comes in. It's like, who do you really trust in this environment? So what works best then is finding that authentic voice that people trust, have them talk about a certain topic. And we collaborate with these trusted voices to lead people to understand, hey, maybe I have a business challenge like this. And the best influencers for us are customers. So what we like to do is pair a thought leader around a topic, and then you relate it to a customer, and the customer explains, yes, oh my gosh, I had this problem, this challenge, but then I was able to fix it. And mind you, we don't overtly be like, it's SAP, right? But then what we lead the audience to do is they start to trust first that influencer, then they trust the customer because they, as you said, it just like me, I relate to this person. I'm that business that's having that issue. And then it's like, if you want to find out more, click here. And then we finally take you over to like the product area where then you can do the research on yourself and you can be like, wow, this customer, I'm just like them. I need to talk to someone and they can tell me more about how SAP can help my business.
Gotcha. And it sounds like almost community building, right? Like the influence is the tip of the iceberg.
Correct.
There's like,
absolutely.
there's almost, how do you create something, and maybe viral is the wrong word, but this sense of connectedness into a cohort of people where that influence becomes almost community-like.
No, it does. And, it's interesting. You had said something earlier. It triggered in me that, I love this one Maya Angelou quote, right? Great Maya Angelou, the poet, that she says, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
100%.
And in that moment, and this goes to like the customer experience and things like that, or just experience in general, if you can make that connection through a piece of content that's been creatively, innovatively developed, and you can make that connection, then you can have a customer for life because that initial, emotional connection. And that is so key in what we're doing. It's people to people. It's building, as you said, that community, but it's creating these relationships. Sometimes people look at influencers, maybe they don't know them personally, but because they follow them, they read their content, they feel they know who they are. Maybe they've had some interactions on social media, and that's all part of it. And it's also humanizing our customers. It's showing the authentic side of how our customers have these business challenges. And hey, you're not alone, right? And so it is this community. It's how it's making, people have the same feelings. And then the ultimate success is like, then this customer uses our products and it helps their business succeed. That's the ultimate goal.
And I love you use that quote because that's one of my favorite quotes. I think it's almost like it's a popular quote to be someone's favorite quote these days. It's everyone's favorite quote. But it's one of mine as well.
I've liked it before.
You're claiming it. I told that in my piece to Cam, I said, this is going to be fun, and you're not letting us down at all. Hey, listen,
I love Maya Angelou's "I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings," and I'm dating myself again, but that's a book from a long time ago, and I've loved her stuff for a long time. Anyhow.
All right. Well, I'm glad you started with the quotes because I'm going to read you one. And I'm pretty sure I'm dating myself now because the glasses are going on as well. But I'm pretty sure you should know who said this, right? If you don't, we've got some problems. So it goes something like this. With my career, I'm a creative, a marketer, a strategist, a salesperson, a negotiator, a manager, and most of all, a storyteller. As the head of our global influencer program at SAP, my goal for 2019 is to create a world-class program that helps SAP become a top 10 brand. I truly want to see my company succeed. And the only way that we're going to do it is by infusing influencers in everything we do. I love the quote because it's passionate. I have two questions for you. Well, one I'm not going to ask because I know you told me earlier the metrics aren't out. We don't know where that in terms of the top 10 brand stats, they're not out yet, so you're still hanging on that one. But the one I want to ask you, when I read a quote that's from you that's so passionate about that, you clearly believe not just in the art of influencer marketing, but you believe in its effect, right? And I want to ask you why.
Because at the heart of it, it's all around people, and people want to relate to other people. And the interesting thing is everyone has a story to tell and everyone wants to be heard. And I think influencers are the way that these stories can be told. Because mind you, we're working with trusted voices influencing buyer decisions, but an influencer can be anyone. Seriously, right? So our customers are influencers. Our SAP employees are influencers. And I think that that's the passion part of what I love to do is in my job, I'm connecting all the dots, but at the core of it, it's the people to people relationship,
Right.
bar none. And that's
Yeah.
the key thing. And if you can't guess, your listeners by now, I'm a people person. I like to talk to people. I'm an extrovert. And so this is a natural fit for me. And, you know, it's what is that quote about, you know, find that passion and then work doesn't really seem like, you know,
Right.
work.
You'll never work a
Yeah.
day in your life. Right.
Yeah. And I think it's like, you know, part of me, yeah, there's lots of ups and downs with what I do, but the core of it is working with people. And I love that. And that's the key to a successful influencer marketing program. You have to like to work with people.
There's another quote from you, and I'm just going to paraphrase this rather than reading. It's very recent. I saw it maybe a couple of weeks ago. So it's actually a 2020 quote where, and let me paraphrase it so I don't get this wrong, but it was something along the lines of 2020 being the year of B2B influencer marketing. I mean, you know, we're used to seeing B2B brands take longer to adopt some of the more contemporary marketing strategies, and probably for good reason, right? The frontier of new technique and the merging of technology and social sciences and testing ideas in a macro sense in a consumer world makes a lot of sense. And B2B guys are just smart. They just pick up what works and applies it after the guinea pigs have finished, right? But I'm interested in your perspective on this. B2B is a place that we know we'll start to see the adoption of influencer, and clearly, you know, SAP is a B2B company, so you're well positioned to comment, but what's behind that forecast?
Behind the forecast is doing this for probably the last 7 years. And I've been someone who goes out and speaks at industry events about influencer marketing. And I started doing this maybe 4 years ago, being on panels at like a social media marketing world. And then I started doing like the digital summits. And this year, I did quite a few of the digital summits. And I started out in February, I think it was in Phoenix, and talking about influencer marketing. And here I am with all these other kind of brands. If you can imagine, like known retail brands, like a Frito-Lay, and they're talking about influencer marketing. And there I am. S is not, you know, S doesn't stand for sexy in SAP. It doesn't. But there I am talking about B2B influencer marketing. And slowly at every event I went to, and I went to Phoenix and Austin and New York and Boston and North Carolina, all these different places, every single place I went to, I'd have people come up to me and go, thank you for talking about B2B. We are just about to start our program. I'd love to follow up with you. The year before, in 2018, you'd get a smattering, not that much, but 2019, everywhere I went consistently, I'd have 5 to 10 people coming up to me and saying, thank you. I really loved what you presented. And mind you, I like to present lessons learned, right? Because we're going to make a lot of mistakes, but I don't call them mistakes. I call them lessons learned because you got to throw it on the wall, see if it sticks. It might
I'm
stink,
not editing
but...
that. I'm telling you right now, I'm not editing that out.
But something
It might even make the promo reel.
There you go. But the key is it's a lesson learned, right? And so what we're doing is we're setting some best practices, and it's kind of exciting because, for instance, when live streaming came into, I mean, it's being, now your, you know, listeners out there, remember Blab. Blab was this streaming platform back in the day before Facebook became prominent.
Right.
It was right when like Meerkat and Periscope were going. We were doing influencer marketing with Blab, right? And I laughed because back then, I don't know what number our iPhone was, but it was kind of crappy when you look back on it. But at the time, it was like, ooh, this is innovative, right? And so my point is that from my experience, you know, not a lot of companies are doing it. Maybe I'm like kind of that one lone wolf that everyone laughs at because like, oh, here goes Ursula again with something crazy. But consistently in 2019, people came up to me and said, we're starting a B2B influencer party. We're starting. I love what you're saying. I'm learning from you. I've had people come up and say, we socially listen to what you're doing at your events because we want to learn. And I'm like, what? I'm like, really? Oh, wow, someone's actually listening? But that's why I made that statement that 2020 is going to be the year that you're going to see more B2B influencer marketing programs. Because the one thing I say in all of my presentations, everyone asks me, what's your best advice to starting a program? Best advice? Just hit the damn button. My influencer friend, Brian Fanzo, coined this phrase years ago, was just hit that damn button and start. Because if you don't start, you're not going to have those lessons learned to build on it and scale.
Yeah, great advice. I think when, you think about the pace of change, and to me, that's one of the reasons why so many organizations don't, to use that phrase, hit the button. When you think about it critically, it's the reason to hit the button, right? It's you keep waiting for perfect conditions that you understand. We're all chasing the tech, we're all chasing society, right?
Yeah. Perfect is the enemy of good. Because sometimes, it's funny, when I worked at Apple, everything had to be perfect, or Steve Jobs, oh, watch out. But what I've learned over the years is perfect is the enemy of good. Sometimes good is good enough. Sometimes you're going to hit a home run. Sometimes, ooh, that really stinks. But what do we learn from it? And so there's something to be said about trying to innovate and do things differently. And it's going to stick sometime. It's going to stick really well. We've had some great campaigns that have done very well.
Right. Let's talk about the tech for a moment. When I'm speaking a lot, one of the things that I'm often almost reminding people, it feels like you've almost got to remind people just the volume of change in the last decade. So 2010 to 2020 or 2019 was just ridiculous. We saw the internet hit 2 billion users in 2012. That was double what it was in 2007. Cloud computing became mainstream about the same time. Mobile was exploding, and we started consuming the internet on our mobile more than on PCs by 2015, right? That kind of combination of the explosion of mobile and internet allowed social, as we think about it today, to then also explode. That changed almost overnight our consumption behavior. If you think about just life without the internet, your mobile or social, that's what defined the last decade in many ways, right? And it's almost inconceivable to try and think about what our lives would be like now or going forward without those dynamics. From an influencer perspective, and I know there's some obvious logical tech value that have come out of that change, but you've been living through that, right? As influencer marketing has sort of evolved in that period. What's been the major piece of evolution? Can you even put a finger on it? Is there a particular point or a tipping point somewhere in this last decade that, in the tech side, that was either the most important tech, or maybe it wasn't the tech itself, maybe it was the impact of tech? Is there something that really changed the game?
Social media. The power of social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and I'd say more, I'm going to focus on Facebook and Twitter. The power of those two platforms on society. And, we don't have to go down a political track here, but the 2016 election, wow, Cambridge Analytica. Right. The one thing that we learned, and this relates back to influencers and authenticity and trust, is we have to be careful. The one thing we learned out of the election in 2016 is people blindly believed what was on social media, what they found, just a friend posted something, but then you'd go look and it was a fake site that had fake information. And so we have to be very, very careful with the voices that we decide to align ourselves with, like in influencer marketing. And social media is such a powerful tool. I listened to a podcast called Darknet Diaries. Awesome podcast. Need to listen to it. It talks about all these things that have happened over the last decade or so around technology and things that have happened. I mean, it's crazy. And I think social media is one of those game changers on society in general, because although it's brought us closer, you have people that manipulate. And I think that we have a responsibility when we utilize social media as a vehicle to get the message out about our brands and our products, that you have to be transparent and authentic, right, on social media. And that's why, moving forward with, our influencer campaigns, we want to make sure people know, hey, this was a paid partnership. right? And be very authentic, that they know that, even though it's a thought leadership piece, there's nothing that mentions really SAP products in it, is that it's authentic. And that's where, like, social media, you have to watch out, because, with Adobe Photoshop, the deep fake videos, you have to know your sources. And that comes back to just this whole thing of the people to people marketing and trusting that person. But then again, it's like online, who do you trust? How do you know this person is real?
Yeah.
And so that's where I think is the tipping point, is social media is, bar none, the greatest technology out there, but has the most potential for abuse. And we just have to be careful with it.
Right. You could frame that as another question, is that, and we know it's endorsement, but is it also needing to have an element of leadership attached to this?
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, in prepping for this, and you gave me the run sheet, and I looked at that question about endorsement and leadership. And it's funny, because when we work with influencers, I'm not asking them to endorse our products, right? In the B2B space, it's very difficult to say, can you endorse this SAP product? Because they probably don't use it. Very different than like an athlete in the B2C space who's like, I use Gatorade, very, very different, right? And so it is around leadership. It's definitely around leadership, because you're looking at, you're educating an audience, and you're leading with your thoughts on a topic. And that's where you have to really look at the people you work with, how authentic they are. Do they have a degree? I mean, I could tell you, actually, maybe I'll save this for my war story, but there's some interesting things that when you meet influencers, you need to meet with them in person, because sometimes they're not what they appear to be online, right? So you have to be very careful with that.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing more and more of that. It's part of the work I do is in trust, you may have noticed, and some of the models that I've looked at there particularly have this element where we can, the way that we form trust and the way that we break trust has actually been evolving on us a little bit as well. This whole shift around how quickly we assess someone, right, is in some ways empowered by digital, but really dangerous, right? And the opportunity is in that as well, but it's an opportunity that comes with responsibility. So to me, I think we're still learning, right? And what's going to happen in this next wave is we apply things like artificial intelligence over the top of these. We've already see sort of rogue bots out on social media, right? But once you get into AI driving this at even faster rates, we're going to be even more challenged to keep up with the ethical questions that some of this is posing to us.
We could have a totally other podcast talking about this.
Yeah, there's probably some good ones out there. Okay, so you raised it before, and I would love to hear your war stories, because in terms of, the last decade, as we kind of touched on, the story that we opened with, there's got to be a nugget in there. I know you'd be good for at least one.
Well, I'll give you one, and I'm going to not name names and maybe change some things around a bit.
Sure.
But it gets back to the whole thing of authenticity. And, what happens a lot of the time is when you start an influencer marketing program, the first thing you do is go, oh my gosh, there's this person, they have 100,000 followers. We need to work with them. And the first thing I always say is, one, you need to vet them. You need to read their content, watch their content, listen to their content, and follow them. Start to engage with them. Really start to understand who they are. See who's following them, who talks about them. Because what is that expression of, like, when you walk into the room, you don't want to be like, hey, it's me. You want to walk into a room and everyone goes, oh my gosh, it's you, right? You want that endorsement from the audience. And so there's this one influencer that everyone's like, you've got to work with this influencer. He's great. He's fantastic. And I started following online. I'm like, okay. But then, this person was located in a region of the world that I'm not familiar with. And I started kind of reviewing their background, and there's not a lot of information out there. And, why is everyone interested in, in this person? And yes, they had a lot of followers, and yes, they were working with some larger name brands. And I said, okay, let me, I'm going to be over in that part of the world. Let me meet with them. And so I just had a very weird experience meeting with him. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but, we met in the hotel lobby, and we ended up going out and getting dinner at a local restaurant. And just the conversation with the person didn't align with the online persona, just very weird. And, over dinner, I got to know this person more, just asking questions, because I'm a people person. I'm going to ask, personal questions, and it's how much they want to share. And this person liked to overshare. And it turned out that this person kind of, in my opinion, had started years ago to assume the personality of a dead spouse. And that person
wow.
had all the credibility, had the background, the pedigree and everything. And they were kind of doing work with them. And then slowly, it's like after that person passed away, then that person kind of took on their personality, and I think took over their social handle and changed it. So what happened, and mind you, this is just my speculation, I could be
My
totally wrong,
goodness.
but the whole thing is, when you look back, you can't track necessarily, because remember, you can change
Yeah.
your name, right? And so you could change the profile, and people would just assume that's you. You could have 100,000 followers, but if you changed everything 8 years ago and you already had the followers and you changed things, maybe people didn't notice or say anything.
Wow.
And so it was very, very bizarre. And then in talking to this person, finding out that, people had done them favors and had helped them write stories or blogs that had gotten published. And I was kind of amazed that he was oversharing with me. But the point of the story is, you need to meet with your influencers in person. This is not a one and done deal. It has to be this long-term relationship. You want to work with them. And so I always encourage people, like, sometimes you can't fly to the far corners of the world to meet someone, but if you really want to do a campaign with an influencer, find out where they're going to be. All of these influencers travel all over the world. They'll probably be in your neck of the woods. They might be at a conference you're attending. Take them out for coffee, take them out for dinner. Just talk to them, get to know them. And that's why with our core influencers we work with, I become kind of pseudo friends with them, because I follow what they're doing on social media with their families. And mind you, I keep, a fine line between business and also just the personal. But the war story just brings up that you really need to vet your influencers and know who they are. And I know some people in my company were like, no, we need to work with him. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. But they were basing it off just what they saw online. And then after I told
Right.
them the story, they're like, oh my gosh, thank God you did that. And I'm like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's where you have to just be careful. And that is a very, I think, unique war story. But
I hope so.
it is one for the books, right? It is one
Yeah,
for the books.
absolutely. I have to ask, because I do with all the guests that come on here now, because they are so talented and they are so warm and generous. If you were if you were to give one piece of advice, in fact, I don't really want to limit it. So you can give a life piece of advice, or you could imagine someone out there that's perhaps sitting in a different part of marketing, or maybe in tech somewhere, and they're liking what they're hearing and they're thinking about a career into this influencer type space. So maybe some career advice, either or both. What would you leave people today?
Career advice, always raise your hand. If you're someone that is starting out, and take on every possible opportunity as you can, because you won't know what you like unless you do it. And I was always someone that would help everyone, to a point where maybe a little detriment that I was taking on too much work, but I always had high expectations of myself, and I would deliver good quality, and I'd work my ass off. I'll talk to young millennials who are like, wow, Ursula, I want to get to your level. And I'm like, yeah, getting back of the line, that took me a long time. And I think the key is that raising your hand is wanting to dive in and give yourself an opportunity to grow in your career. And you might have to get in there and learn it. So for
Right.
example, when I raised my hand, when my VP way back when said, Ursula, can you manage these social media accounts? I'd never really done it except for my personal side with my writing. And I said, absolutely, I'm going to do it. Well, guess what I did? I dug in. I did the research. I started connecting with everyone I could on social media. I attended tweet chats. Oh my gosh, I think I attended like 10 tweet chats a week. And what that did is it taught me how to write 140 characters or fewer. And back then, I mean, you had to. So I was able to write very quickly, turn on a dime, kind of my creativity, and respond to people. And this empowered me. It got me being able to write better copy. And then I got to meet all these influencers. And so, the key takeaway is raise your hand, help people as much as you can. I'm a big helper. I love to help people. People gave me an opportunity to put my foot in the door at various companies. And so always offer to help. Dive into something that you might be a little uncomfortable with, but do the research, figure it out, ask for help, right? And, ultimately push that damn button and just do it. No one's going to do it for you, right? You might have people that will help in your life, like maybe give you a leg up, maybe offer you that job, but don't disappoint them. Keep going and produce the best work you can and ask questions. There's always lessons learned, and you can keep going and, do the best that you can.
I love that advice. And the reason I do is that we have, you talked about it yourself in the social realm. There's these highly curated lives, right? And particularly younger people have like an expectation on themselves. They have to present this really perfect veneer to the world. And when you say, you know what, ask for help, that's something that is almost viewed as like this weakness. And actually it's a really great sign of strength, right? And it's how we grow. And so it's fantastic advice. And on that note, Ursula Ringham, thank you so much for being on the show. We could do this for a long time, I feel like. So we'll let our people get back to whatever they do and they're not listening to this. Thank you again. It's been a real pleasure.
Aarron, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Evolve with Aarron Spinley. To ensure that you never miss an episode, please subscribe on YouTube or on your favorite podcast player. Thanks so much for hanging out. Until next time.